So in this module, we went through and took a look at the steps that you would need to go through for pen testing web applications. We talked about the purposes. We need to zero in on which servers are hosting web applications or which ones are our front-end servers. We also talked about looking for any type of authentication weaknesses that may exist. Again, remember, we may be authenticated by one device but being passed through to a different system or target altogether. We then went through and talked about configuration errors. Sometimes they're caused by us humans, sometimes they're created by the manufacturer themselves, which I guess actually would be humans as well. But this is something we can't overlook. We also talked about looking at protocol vulnerabilities. Again, because these applications are running on these complex systems, we have so many different levels of attack vectors that we need to take a look at. We then went through and talked about the different steps that we go through during this pen testing phase. We have to identify which systems are running web applications. And afterwards, we gather as much information, not only about the system itself, but its services and the apps running on that box. We then went through and talked about how we then go through and look at configuration management testing. I believe I mentioned to you guys that most web application attacks take place because of improper configuration. We then talked about looking at the authentication mechanism that's in place, seeing if we can try to bypass the authentication process in any way. We also talked about session management testing. Again, looking to see if the session that's created by the application is vulnerable to any type of attack, like a fixation or a session hijack. We then went through and talked about the authorization testing. This again is where we go through and see if we can do things like escalate our privileges to access other areas of the application, maybe the administrative page. We then talked about data validation. Again, here we're testing for things like SQL injection, cross-site flashing, or even a stored cross-site script. We then went through and took a look at denial of service testing on the web application. Again, our goal may not be to steal the data, but just make it so that the application itself can't operate, which would affect the company. This is where we looked at things like lockouts for customer accounts, or looking for any type of buffer overflows, or even the maximum number of objects that an application could actually handle. We then talked about our web services and testing them. This is actually one of the primary targets or vectors that we should be looking at. Again, this is because our applications are talking typically with other applications. And with the big push recently of mobile devices or mobile applications, it really can expose information that's in your internal network to the outside world. And then of course we did a little AJAX testing. It's during this particular test that we can find out possible other endpoints or other destinations for requests from the application itself. And then of course we talked about what we do once we've gone through all these steps, and that is again documenting everything. So now that we've hit the web apps, we're going to switch things up in the next module. We're going to be taking a look at how we pen test Wi-Fi networks.